Welcome. This is AllMinucOne Quick Shots. So, folks, today, as we'll be going on all week, Amy Coney Barrett is in her confirmation hearing, and I just happened to turn on the TV at a particular time when Ted Cruz was finishing up his remarks on the decisions made by the Supreme Court that were narrow, that would alter the Constitution. And then he went on with some just nonsense kind of questions, asking about her family and whatever else. And then Amy Klobuchar came out and spoke a bunch of gibberish. And that gibberish was a complete echo of what Kamala Harris said during the vice presidential debate with Mike Pence. And that is that Abraham Lincoln decided near an election that he wasn't going to nominate a Supreme Court justice. Well, folks, that's an utter, absolute lie. The history of that event is as simple as this. The Senate was adjourned at the time. They were back home with their families. Back in the 1860s, believe it or not, there weren't airplanes where people could fly overnight or get a ticket in just a few hours, at the government's expense, by the way, and come straight to D.C. You know, if you live out in California, I think that's a 4-hour flight, maybe. And depending on if you're flying into Reagan or Dulles, you're quite close to D.C. Reagan is literally right outside of D.C., and it's pretty easy to get in and out of. Dulles is a little bit further. There's a lot more traffic, but whatever. The reality is that Abraham Lincoln filled that seat immediately as soon as the Senate came back and started, doing their senator thing again instead of being home. That's why Lincoln didn't nominate a Supreme Court justice. Now, I want to remind you that Joe Biden, this is basically the Biden rule that he came up with, that, well, if the Senate and the president are divided, that we don't go forward. And then when that was used against them by McConnell back when Barack Obama had his last nominee, they didn't like it. And now they're trying to reverse things again. Because always remember, the left is only worried and concerned about power. They're like petulant children that wish to change the rules of the game constantly. So every kid gets around, they decide they're going to play, Space Rangers or something. And everybody has a laser. And suddenly one kid has a force field. And they're like, no, we all said that you won't have a force field. And then that kid goes, well, I get to have a force field, but no one else does. That's what's going on here. And frankly, no one wants to play with that kid. I know there are a lot of people on the side of the left-wing establishment. I'm not sure why. Mostly, in my personal opinion, I believe it's largely because of ignorance and ideological possession. A lot of it's ignorance. A lot of people just don't know, aren't aware. They get sold a lot of propaganda, and they simply believe that these are the people for justice and truth because they appeal to my emotions. Well, folks, that's a really terrible way to go about life. And I know, as an artistic individual who, when I was young, followed my passions, it led me into much trouble. And it's not a good thing. It's much better to sit back, plan things far ahead of time, be reasonable, and take your time with matters. And that would be essentially the conservative approach. Now, there are conservatives who are left-wing, for sure, in my opinion, but they're going to align with the Republican Party as far as votes go, generally speaking, and this confirmation will go through. There's nothing they can do to stop it. And I'm pretty certain Donald Trump will be elected, despite what the odd polling is saying. I think there's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of voters who want to keep to themselves. And there's simply a lot of people who they're not as politically involved as you would think and fed up with the system. And what they're seeing is riots, and they're seeing lockdowns in Democratic areas. They know that the economy was doing well. They know that they got a good tax break and they had a slightly larger paycheck. There are certain intangibles that I think a lot of voters who are low information, low resolution voters see. And I think a lot of those voters too, other than the one or two issue of like, overturning Roe v. Wade, which, I could be wrong, but I would say, mark my words, that's not happening. It's just not, it's established law. Barack Obama, one of the few things I agree with him on, said this back in his campaign book in 2008. And essentially, he said it was established law. He didn't think it was going anywhere. And I pretty much agree with that, whether I agree with the ruling or not, because it absolutely is constitutionally a states' rights issue. But yeah, that's probably not going anywhere. The other thing that Klobuchar talked about was the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, as most people know it, and getting in her ruling against the, or not ruling, but a paper she wrote about the individual mandate. Well, folks, the individual mandate was sold to us as not a tax. The reason why it went to the Supreme Court is because it was a tax. The reason why the Supreme Court, Judge Roberts, finally ruled on it is he's like, well, yes, it is a tax, even though they said it wasn't, and therefore it's legal. But what it really did is it mandated that if you didn't have health insurance, that you had to pay a tax. Well, that's absurd. And what the ACA did, Affordable Care Act, is essentially subsidize people who maybe couldn't have health care and couldn't afford health care by raising other people's health care. And literally, I've mentioned this before, but I've known plenty of people. I've seen plenty of things about it. Again, it's an emotionally appealing thing. Oh, I'm going to help these people. Look, I don't carry healthcare because at best I'll go to the VA. But the main reason why I don't carry healthcare is because it would be through my wife. And my wife would have to spend an entire paycheck, essentially, or nearly, 3/4 of one of her paychecks every month to have me covered. There's nothing affordable about this act. And she makes too much money. There's no way I could get on Obamacare, nor would I want to. So you're creating a system that's just meant to break down the system more. As far as pre-existing conditions and all that stuff, well, pre-existing conditions, I'm sorry, folks. There's a thing that insurance companies do, and that is judge who they can insure based on a rate of how expensive it is. Because, see, they have to make money. They have employees. They have to grow. They have to be able to cover these costs. But the more the government bureaucracy gets involved, the more the cost will go up. And it is the exact reason and problem why we have such issues with healthcare in the United States. The cost of healthcare began going up through the 50s and 60s because of inflation. And especially after Nixon completely got rid of the foreign exchange gold standard. So the idea was, we'll tie these jobs to these insurance companies. And then you also, on top of that, you get liability suits. You have, doctors have to ask for more. There's all this processing that has to go on. You have to hire special people to handle this. Again, it's just more bureaucracy and more of a reason why these things have gotten so expensive. But yeah, this whole thing is kind of just a big show. It's a big thing where the left's going to campaign for their wonderful ideological, emotionally feel-good beliefs that make no sense on paper, that have no logical reality or historical basis. And need I remind you, Amy Klobuchar said, just as Kamala Harris, Honest Abe didn't do this. Well, he couldn't because Senate was not having hearings at the time. They were adjourned. They were all home. And with all that, folks, this has been AllMinucOne Quick Shots, and I wish you all well.